Picture this, a charity gala, 73 witnesses, and a CEO who made the biggest mistake of his life. His pregnant wife stood in front of him in a dress too tight for her 7-month belly. She tried to pull away. He grabbed her harder. She slapped his hand, and then he slapped her face in front of everyone. But here's where it gets interesting. A waiter stepped between them. Not just any waiter, a man with dark hair and serious eyes who looked at her like he knew her, like he recognized her. Because he did. You see, that waiter was supposed to be dead, killed in action 8 years ago. Dog tags sent home in a wooden box. A widow who mourned and moved on and married again. Except he was not dead. He was standing right there, and he had evidence that would destroy everything. This is a story about a woman who thought she was trapped, about a man who thought he was untouchable, and about the moment when everything she believed about her life shattered like glass. Stay with me, because what happens next will blow your mind. And if you want to see how this ends, how she fights back, and what that dead husband really wants, hit that like button, drop a comment telling me if you have ever felt trapped, and subscribe so you do not miss what happens when the courtroom doors open and the truth comes out. Trust me, you need to hear this. Everyone asks why I did not leave sooner. They ask it with kind eyes, sympathetic voices, gentle hands on my shoulder. But underneath the kindness, I can hear what they are really asking. Why did you stay? Why did you let it happen? Why were you so weak? Let me show you why. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I am sitting in a hospital bed with a sleeping baby girl in my arms. My face has a bruise along my left cheekbone that is turning from purple to green. My wrists have marks from where someone grabbed me too hard. The hospital bracelet on my arm says I am a patient in the maternity ward, but the police report in my file says I am also a victim. The story I am about to tell you happened 6 months ago. It happened at a charity gala on a Saturday night in September. It happened in front of 73 people who saw everything, and it happened because I finally understood something important. Sometimes the most dangerous moment is not when you are trapped. It is when you realize you have been trapped all along. Let me take you back to that morning. The morning of the gala. The morning everything changed. I woke up at 6:30 in the morning in our house on Riverside Drive. It was a beautiful house, 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a kitchen with marble countertops. My husband Daniel bought it for us 2 years ago when his consulting firm landed a major contract. He was so proud of that house, he would walk me through each room and tell me how lucky we were. I was 7 months pregnant that September morning. My belly was round and heavy, my ankles were swollen, my back ached constantly. But Daniel wanted me to attend the charity gala with him that evening, so I was going to attend. I stood in front of my closet trying to find something that would fit. My maternity dresses hung in a neat row, all of them purchased by Daniel. He liked to choose my clothes. He said he had better taste than I did. He was probably right. He was right about most things. I pulled out a navy blue dress with a soft neckline. It looked comfortable. It looked appropriate for a pregnant woman at a charity event. Daniel walked into the bedroom. He was already dressed in his charcoal gray suit, his tie perfectly knotted, his hair styled with precision. He looked at the dress in my hands and frowned. Daniel said, "You are not wearing that one." I looked down at the dress. I said, "Why not? It is one of the new ones you bought." Daniel walked to the closet and pulled out a different dress. This one was burgundy with a fitted waist. He said, "This one is better, more elegant. You want to look elegant tonight, do not you?" I took the burgundy dress from his hands. I said, "This one is a little tight around my stomach now." Daniel smiled. He kissed my forehead. He said, "You look beautiful in everything, babe. Just trust me on this. The burgundy makes you glow." I put on the burgundy dress. It was tight. It pressed against my belly in a way that made breathing slightly uncomfortable. But Daniel smiled when he saw me in it, so I kept it on. That is how it worked in our marriage. Small decisions, small adjustments, small compromises. They did not feel like control. They felt like love. We ate breakfast together in our beautiful kitchen. Daniel made scrambled eggs and whole wheat toast. He set my prenatal vitamins next to my plate with a glass of orange juice. He did this every morning. He was a good husband. Everyone said so. While I ate, Daniel checked his phone. He scrolled through emails, his face focused and serious. Then he looked up at me and said, Did you transfer the grocery money to our joint account yesterday? I paused with my fork halfway to my mouth. I said, no, I forgot. I will do it this morning. Daniel set his phone down. He said, Sarah, we talked about this. I need to track our spending. How can I manage our finances if you do not transfer the money? I said, I know, I am sorry. I will do it right after breakfast. Daniel reached across the table and took my hand. He said, I am not mad. I just want us to be responsible, especially now with the baby coming. We need to be smart about money. I nodded. He was right. We did need to be responsible. After breakfast, I went upstairs to get my phone so I could transfer the money. But when I opened my phone, I saw something that made me stop. I had been scrolling through old photos the night before, and I had left the photo app open. On the screen was a picture from 4 years ago. It was me and my best friend Rebecca Thompson at my college graduation. We had our arms around each other, laughing at something the photographer said. We looked so happy. I had not spoken to Rebecca in 2 years. I sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at that photo. I tried to remember the last conversation Rebecca and I had. It was an argument. She had called me and said she was worried about me. She said Daniel was isolating me from my friends. She said I had changed, that I never went out anymore, that I always needed his permission for everything. I defended Daniel. I told her she did not understand our relationship. I told her she was being jealous and unsupportive. She said she loved me and she just wanted me to be happy. I said I was happy. She said she did not believe me. That was the last time we spoke, 2 years ago. I looked at my phone contacts. Rebecca's number was blocked. I did not remember blocking it, but I must have done it during that argument. Or maybe Daniel blocked it for me. He had access to my phone. He said it was so he could help me stay organized. I heard Daniel coming up the stairs. I quickly closed the photo app and opened the banking app. By the time he walked into the bedroom, I was transferring money from my account to our joint account. Daniel smiled at me. He said, thank you, babe. See, that was not so hard. He was right. It was not hard. It was just a small thing, a small adjustment, a small compromise. But as I sat there with my phone in my hand, and my swollen ankles, in my tight dress, and my blocked contacts, I felt something stir inside me. It was small. It was quiet. But it was there. It felt like a question I was afraid to ask. The St. Michael Hospital Charity Gala was held in the gymnasium of the hospital's community center. The organizers had transformed the space with white linen, string lights, and centerpieces made of roses and candles. It looked lovely. It looked like the kind of place where good people gathered to do good things. Daniel and I arrived at 7 o'clock in the evening. His hand rested on the small of my back as we walked through the entrance. He was guiding me. He always guided me. His colleagues smiled and waved. His business partners shook his hand and complimented his suit. Everyone loved Daniel Mitchell. I stood beside him in my tight burgundy dress and my uncomfortable heels. My feet were already aching. My back was already throbbing. But I smiled. I played the role of the supportive, pregnant wife. A waiter walked past carrying a tray of champagne glasses. I did not take one because I was pregnant, but I watched the bubbles rise in those glasses, and I wished I could have just one sip. Just something to take the edge off the tension I felt building in my shoulders. Another waiter appeared beside me. He was younger, maybe 30 years old, with dark hair and serious eyes. He was carrying a tray of sparkling water. He looked directly at me and said, "Ma'am, would you like some water?" I looked at him, surprised. I said, "Yes, thank you." He handed me a glass. His hand was steady. His eyes were kind. He said, "If you need anything else, just let me know." There was something familiar about him, something in the way he looked at me, like he was seeing more than just a pregnant woman in a tight dress, like he was seeing someone he recognized. But I did not know him. I had never seen him before. Daniel turned and noticed me talking to the waiter. He frowned. He said, "Sarah, come on. I want to introduce you to some people." I followed Daniel across the gymnasium. He introduced me to his colleagues, his clients, his business partners. I shook hands and smiled and answered questions about my due date and whether we were having a boy or a girl. Everyone was kind. Everyone was polite. Everyone said we made a beautiful couple. But I could not stop thinking about that waiter, about the way he looked at me, about the familiarity I felt when our eyes met. Daniel leaned close to me and whispered, "Straighten your posture. You are slouching." I straightened my back. The movement made my spine ache. Daniel said, "And stop fidgeting. You look nervous." I had not realized I was fidgeting. I pressed my hands against my belly and held still. Daniel continued talking to his colleagues. I stood beside him and tried to focus on the conversation. But my mind kept drifting. I kept thinking about Rebecca, about the blocked phone number, about the photo of us laughing at graduation, about all the friends I used to have before I met Daniel. Friends who stopped calling, friends who stopped inviting me places, friends who slowly disappeared from my life. Daniel said they were not real friends. He said real friends would support my marriage. He said real friends would not try to create drama. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was better off without them. But standing in that gymnasium, surrounded by people who smiled at Daniel and ignored me, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. I felt alone. Not physically alone, but truly deeply alone. The kind of alone that comes from being invisible in a crowded room. A colleague of Daniel's approached us. His name was Thomas something. I could not remember his last name. He shook Daniel's hand and then turned to me with a friendly smile. Thomas said, "Sarah, Daniel mentioned you are doing some freelance marketing work from home. How is that going?" I blinked. I said, "I am not working right now. The doctor said I should rest during the pregnancy." Thomas looked confused. He said, "Oh, I thought Daniel said you were consulting part-time." Daniel cut in smoothly. He said, "She is doing some very light consulting work. Nothing strenuous. Just keeping her skills sharp for when she goes back after maternity leave." I stared at Daniel. That was not true. I was not doing any consulting work. I had not worked since I quit my job 18 months ago when Daniel said it would be better for our future family if I focused on preparing for motherhood. Thomas nodded and said something else, but I was not listening anymore. I was looking at my husband's face, at the way he smiled so easily while lying, at the way he spoke with such confidence about things that were not true. Later, when Thomas walked away, Daniel gripped my arm. His fingers pressed into my skin just hard enough to hurt. He leaned close and whispered, "Why did you contradict me?" I said I did not mean to. I was just confused about what he was asking. Daniel said, "You made me look like a liar. Do you understand how that makes me feel? Do you understand how unprofessional that makes me look?" I said, "I am sorry. I did not realize you told him I was working." Daniel said, "I tell people you are working because it makes you sound productive. It makes us sound like a strong couple. Can you try to support me instead of undermining me?" His grip on my arm tightened for just a moment. Then he released me and smiled at someone walking past. I stood there with my arm throbbing and my heart racing. I felt dizzy. The gymnasium was too warm. The lights were too bright. The smell of perfume and cologne was overwhelming. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to sit down. But Daniel was not done working the room. He had more hands to shake, more conversations to have, more impressions to make. So I stood beside him and smiled and pretended everything was fine. That is when I felt it. A sharp, sudden pressure low in my abdomen. Not quite pain, but close. A sensation that made me gasp. I said, "Daniel, something feels wrong." He glanced at me. He said, "What?" I said, "I think something is wrong with the baby." Daniel looked around to see if anyone was watching. Then he leaned close and said, "Sarah, do not do this here. Do not create a scene." I said, "I am not creating a scene. I just feel strange. Maybe we should go to the hospital. We are at a hospital fundraiser. We could just go upstairs and have someone check." Daniel said, "You are fine. You are just nervous. Breathe." I pressed my hand to my belly. The pressure was getting stronger. I said, "Daniel, please. I think my water might be breaking." Daniel's face changed, not to concern, to anger. He said, "Your water is not breaking. You are being dramatic. You do this every time we are in public. You always need attention." People were starting to notice us. A woman in a silver dress glanced our way with a concerned expression. A man near the refreshment table stopped mid-conversation to watch. I felt liquid between my legs, warm and wet. I looked down in panic. Had my water actually broken? Or was I imagining it? I said, "Daniel, I need to sit down." He grabbed my arm again. He said, "Stand up straight. Everyone is looking at us. You are embarrassing me." I tried to pull away. He held tighter. I said, let go of me. Daniel said, stop making a scene. And then, without thinking, without planning, without meaning to, I slapped his hand away from my arm. The sound was not loud, but in that moment, with people watching, it might as well have been a gunshot. Daniel's face turned red. His jaw clenched. His eyes went dark with rage. And then he raised his hand and slapped me across the face. The impact was sharp and sudden. My head snapped to the side. Pain bloomed across my cheekbone. My ears rang, my vision blurred. I stumbled backward, reaching blindly for something to hold on to. My hand found the edge of a table. I gripped it to keep from falling. The entire gymnasium went silent. Someone dropped a glass. The shattering sound echoed through the room like an exclamation point. I pressed my hand to my cheek. It was hot. It was throbbing. I could feel the imprint of Daniel's palm on my skin. And then I heard something else. The sound of a metal tray hitting the floor. The clatter of breaking dishes, and a voice, low and dangerous, saying, "Get away from her." I looked up. The waiter with the kind eyes was standing between me and Daniel. His fists were clenched at his sides. His entire body was tense, coiled like a spring ready to release. Daniel stared at the waiter. He said, "Excuse me?" The waiter said, "I said get away from her." And that was the moment everything changed. The gymnasium was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. 73 people stood frozen in place, staring at me, staring at Daniel, staring at the waiter who had just stepped between us. Daniel's face was red, his breath coming in short, angry bursts. He pointed at the waiter and said, "Who do you think you are?" The waiter did not move. He said, "Someone who does not hit pregnant women." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Several people pulled out their phones. I could see the little camera lights turning on, recording everything. Daniel took a step toward the waiter. He said, "You do not know what you are talking about. This is a private matter between me and my wife." The waiter stayed exactly where he was, blocking Daniel's path to me. He said, "Nothing is private when it happens in front of 70 people. I was still holding on to the table, trying to steady myself. My face throbbed. My hands were shaking. The baby moved inside me, a flutter of motion that felt almost like a question. Are we safe? Are we okay? An elderly woman in a purple dress approached me carefully. She touched my arm gently and said, "Sweetheart, are you all right? Should I call for help?" Before I could answer, Daniel turned to the crowd and held up both hands in a gesture of surrender. He said, "Everyone, please calm down. This is a misunderstanding. My wife is 7 months pregnant, and she is having some emotional difficulties. Her doctor warned us this might happen. Pregnancy can cause mood swings and confusion." Several people nodded as if this explanation made perfect sense. Daniel continued. He said, "She slapped me first. You all saw that. I was defending myself. Someone in the crowd said, 'That is not what happened.' But someone else said, 'I saw her hit him. She hit him first.' I looked around at all those faces, some sympathetic, some confused, some already convinced that I was the problem. Daniel was good at this. He was good at controlling the narrative. He was good at making himself the victim. The waiter turned to look at me. His eyes were intense, focused. He said, "Ma'am, do you want to press charges?" Daniel laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. He said, "Press charges? Against me? For what? Self-defense?" A security guard arrived, followed by another. They looked uncertain, glancing between me and Daniel, trying to assess the situation. One of the guards said, "Is there a problem here?" Daniel immediately shifted into his charming, professional mode. He said, "Officer, my wife is having a medical episode. She is pregnant and under a lot of stress. She became aggressive, and I had to restrain her for her own safety. This waiter is interfering and making the situation worse." The security guard looked at me. He said, "Ma'am, is that true?" I opened my mouth to speak, but my throat was tight. My voice came out as barely a whisper. I said, "He hit me. Everyone saw it." The guard said, "Ma'am, several witnesses say you struck him first. Is that accurate?" I felt the world tilting. They were going to believe him. They were going to believe the charming CEO over the emotional pregnant woman. They were going to let him rewrite reality right in front of me. The waiter said, "I have security footage." Everyone stopped. Daniel went very still. The waiter pulled out a small tablet from behind the serving station. He tapped the screen a few times, then turned it toward the security guards. He said, "The camera above the refreshment table captured everything. Watch." The guards leaned in to look at the screen. I could not see what they were watching, but I could see their expressions change. One guard's eyes widened, the other guard's jaw tightened. The first guard said, "Sir, we need you to come with us." Daniel's face went pale. He said, "What? No, that footage does not show context. It does not show that she provoked me." The second guard said, "Sir, the footage shows you striking a pregnant woman in the face. We are going to need to take you in for questioning." Daniel looked around desperately. He said, "This is ridiculous. I am the CEO of Mitchell & Associates. I have lawyers. I have witnesses who will testify that she attacked me first." The waiter said quietly, "And I have video that shows exactly what happened." Daniel's eyes locked on the waiter. He said, "You are fired. Do you understand me? You are done. I will make sure you never work in this city again." The waiter did not react. He just held the tablet steady. The guards took Daniel by the arms. He pulled against them, his voice rising. He said, "Sarah, tell them. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. Tell them you want to go home with me." I looked at my husband, at the man I had loved, at the man who had slowly, carefully, methodically dismantled my entire life until I had nothing left but him. And I said the hardest word I had ever spoken. I said no. Daniel's face crumpled. For just a second, he looked genuinely shocked. Then the anger returned. He said, "You are going to regret this. Do you hear me? You have nothing without me. Nothing." The guards led him toward the exit. The crowd parted to let them through. Several people were still recording on their phones. Several others were whispering to each other. I stood there with my hand on my throbbing cheek, watching my husband disappear through the gymnasium doors. The elderly woman in purple said, "Someone call an ambulance. She needs to be checked." The waiter appeared beside me. He said softly, "Ma'am, sit down. You are shaking." He pulled out a chair and helped me lower myself into it. My legs felt like water. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might burst. The woman in purple brought me water. Someone else brought me a cold compress for my cheek. People were being kind now. Now that Daniel was gone, they were allowed to be kind. The waiter knelt beside my chair. He said, "The ambulance is coming. They are going to take you to the emergency room and check on you and the baby." I looked at him closely for the first time, really looked at him, and that is when I saw it. The shape of his nose, the line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he was worried. I knew that face. I knew it from a lifetime ago. I said, "Jake?" He went very still. His eyes met mine, and I saw the truth there, clear and undeniable. I said, "Jake Cooper?" He nodded slowly. He said, "Hi, Sarah." My mind was reeling. Jake Cooper, my first husband, the man I married when I was 21 years old, the man who deployed to Afghanistan 8 years ago and never came home, the man whose dog tags were sent to me in a small wooden box, the man I mourned for 2 years before I finally, slowly, started to rebuild my life, the man who was supposed to be dead. I said, "How?" He said, "It is a long story, and you need medical attention right now. But I promise I will explain everything." The ambulance arrived. Paramedics came through the gymnasium doors with a stretcher and medical equipment. They checked my vital signs, checked the baby's heartbeat, asked me questions about pain and dizziness and contractions. As they loaded me onto the stretcher, I looked back at Jake. He was standing there in his waiter's uniform, his hands in his pockets, his eyes filled with something that looked like guilt and relief and love, all mixed together. I said, "Do not leave." He said, "I will not." And for the first time that night, I believed someone. The emergency room was bright and cold and filled with the antiseptic smell of hospitals. They put me in a private room and hooked me up to monitors that tracked my heart rate and the baby's heart rate. A nurse brought me a warm blanket and a cup of water. A doctor came in and examined my face, took photos of the bruising, asked me gentle questions about what happened. Every answer felt like pulling a tooth. Yes, he hit me. No, it was not the first time he had been aggressive. Yes, I was afraid of him. No, I did not have anywhere else to go. The doctor, a woman named Dr. Sarah Williams, sat down beside my bed. She said, "Sarah, I need you to understand something. What happened tonight was assault. The police are going to want to take a statement from you. You have the right to press charges. I said, will they arrest him? Dr. Williams said, I do not know. That depends on many factors. But I want you to know that you have options. You do not have to go back to him. I looked down at my belly. The baby was moving again, little flutters and kicks that I had grown to love. I said, I have nothing. No job, no money, no family. My parents died 5 years ago. I do not have anyone. The doctor squeezed my hand. She said, there are resources, shelters, legal aid, people who can help you. A knock on the door interrupted us. A police officer walked in. His name tag said Officer James Morrison. He was middle-aged with kind eyes and a tired expression. He said, Miss Mitchell, I need to take a statement from you about what happened tonight. I told him everything. About the argument, about Daniel grabbing my arm, about me slapping his hand away, about him hitting me in the face, about the waiter who intervened. Officer Morrison wrote everything down in a small notebook. When I finished, he said, Ma'am, I watched the video footage from the venue. It clearly shows your husband striking you. However, several witnesses have stated that you struck him first. In cases of mutual combat, it can be difficult to make an arrest. I felt my chest tighten. I said, I was defending myself. I was trying to get away from him. Officer Morrison said, I believe you, ma'am, but the law is complicated. I'm going to file a report and recommend charges, but ultimately that decision is up to the district attorney's office. He handed me his card. He said, if you feel unsafe or if your husband tries to contact you, call me immediately. In the meantime, I would recommend filing for a restraining order. After Officer Morrison left, I sat alone in that hospital room, feeling more helpless than I had ever felt in my life. Even with video evidence, even with witnesses, even with a bruise on my face, I was not sure anyone was going to protect me. Another knock on the door. This time it was Jake Cooper. He stood in the doorway, still in his waiter's uniform, looking uncertain. He said, Can I come in? I nodded. Jake walked in slowly and sat down in the chair beside my bed. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We just looked at each other, two people who used to know everything about each other and now knew nothing. Finally, I said, They told me you were dead. Jake said, I know. I said, They sent me your dog tags. They sent me a letter saying you were killed in action. I went to your memorial service. I watched them fold a flag. I cried for 2 years. Jake's voice was rough when he spoke. He said, I was captured. Taliban fighters took me and 4 other soldiers after an ambush. They held us in a compound in the mountains. They moved us every few months so we could not be found. 2 of the guys died. 2 of us survived. It took 6 years before we escaped. I felt tears streaming down my face. I said, 6 years. Jake nodded. He said, by the time I got back to the States, I spent another year in VA hospitals. Physical therapy, psychological evaluation, debriefing. By the time I was released, you had already moved on. You had married Daniel. You were building a new life. I did not want to destroy that for you. I said, so you just watched me? You just let me think you were dead? Jake said, I did not know what else to do. You looked happy. And I thought maybe that was better for you. Maybe I was too broken to come back into your life. I stared at him. At this man who had been my whole world when I was 21. At this man who I had mourned and grieved and finally let go. At this man who had come back from the dead and was sitting beside me in a hospital room. I said, why were you working at that gala? Jake said, I have been keeping track of you. I know that sounds creepy, but I just wanted to make sure you were okay. I saw the way Daniel treated you. I saw the way he controlled you. So when I heard there was going to be a fundraiser at the hospital and that he would be there, I got a job with the catering company. I just wanted to be close by in case you needed help. I did not know whether to be angry or grateful. I said, you should have told me. You should have told me you were alive, Jake said. I know. I am sorry. I was a coward. We sat in silence for a while. The monitors beeped softly. The baby moved inside me, a gentle reminder that life was continuing even in the middle of all this chaos. Finally, I said, what happens now? Jake said, now you make decisions about what you want your life to look like. I am not here to rescue you, Sarah. I am not here to replace Daniel. I am just here to help if we want help. I thought about that, about decisions, about control, about the difference between someone helping you and someone controlling you. I said, I need to think. Jake stood up. He said, take all the time you need. I will be around. He left the room and I was alone again with my thoughts and my fears and my sleeping baby girl who had no idea how complicated the world was about to become. 2 days later, I was sitting in a cheap motel room 6 miles from the house I used to share with Daniel. The room smelled like stale cigarettes and cleaning chemicals. The bedspread was thin and scratchy, but it was mine. It was a space Daniel did not control. I had checked myself out of the hospital against the doctor's advice. They wanted to keep me for observation, but I could not afford the hospital bills. I had no health insurance of my own. Everything was under Daniel's company plan. My phone rang constantly. Daniel's mother, Patricia Mitchell, Daniel's lawyer, the pastor from Daniel's family church. Everyone wanted to talk to me. Everyone wanted to convince me to drop the charges and come home. I did not answer any of the calls. On the third day, there was a knock on my motel room door. I looked through the peephole and saw a woman in a business suit holding a manila envelope. I opened the door cautiously. The woman said, "Are you Sarah Mitchell?" I said yes. She handed me the envelope and said, "You have been served." Then she walked away. I sat on the motel bed and opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a legal document, a petition for emergency custody. Daniel was suing me for custody of our unborn child. The document was filled with legal language I barely understood, but the main points were clear. Daniel was claiming I was mentally unstable. He was claiming I had made false allegations of abuse. He was claiming I was homeless and unable to provide for a child. He was claiming he should have custody of the baby as soon as she was born. The hearing was scheduled for 2 days from now. I called the number for the public defender's office that Officer Morrison had given me. A tired woman named Jennifer Walsh answered. I explained the situation. She said she would meet me at the courthouse on the day of the hearing, but she warned me that with Daniel's resources, this was going to be an uphill battle. I hung up and sat on that motel bed and cried. I cried until I had no tears left. Then there was another knock on the door. This time it was Monica Barrett. I recognized her from Daniel's company. She was the HR director. We had met a few times at company parties. Monica said, "Can I talk to you?" I let her in. She sat down on the edge of the bed and said, "I am so sorry, Sarah. I am so sorry." I said, "Why are you here?" Monica pulled out her phone. She said, "I recorded the incident at the gala. I have clear video of Daniel hitting you. I was going to testify on your behalf." I felt a surge of hope. I said, "That is amazing. Thank you." Monica's face crumbled. She said, "But I can not do it." Daniel's lawyers contacted me. They said if I testify, I will be fired for violating company policy. And they are right. I recorded someone without permission at a private event. I could lose my job, my pension, everything. I have 2 kids in college. I cannot afford to lose my job. The hope died as quickly as it had appeared. I said, "So the video is useless?" Monica said, "Daniel's lawyers are claiming it is inadmissible. They are claiming it violates recording consent laws. Even if I wanted to submit it, the judge might throw it out." I felt like I was drowning. Every piece of evidence, every witness, every hope was slipping through my fingers. Monica said, "I am so sorry. I wish I could help you." After she left, I sat alone in that motel room and realized the truth. Daniel was going to win. He had money, lawyers, resources, and the system on his side. I had nothing. That is when my phone rang again. This time it was a number I did not recognize. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. A man's voice said, "Sarah Mitchell?" I said, "Yes." The voice said, "My name is Pastor Frank Reynolds. I am the pastor at Daniel's Family Church. I would like to meet with you to discuss your situation." I said, "I do not want to talk to anyone from Daniel's family." Pastor Reynolds said, "I understand, but I am coming as a mediator, not as Daniel's advocate. I want to help you find a path forward that is best for everyone, especially your unborn child." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him. He arrived an hour later with Daniel's mother, Patricia Mitchell. They sat on the motel bed across from me and talked about forgiveness, about marriage being sacred, about how children need their fathers, about how Daniel had made a mistake, but he was getting help. He was in anger management. He was in therapy. He was trying to change. Pastor Reynolds said, Sarah, I have counseled Daniel, and I truly believe he is remorseful. He loves you. He loves his unborn child. He is willing to do whatever it takes to make this right. Patricia said, Daniel is my son, and I know him. He would never intentionally hurt anyone. He was under stress. He made a terrible choice. But he is not a monster. They handed me pamphlets, articles about pregnancy-induced stress, articles about how trauma can create false memories, articles about the importance of keeping families together. I felt myself breaking. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe Daniel really was just stressed and I had provoked him by slapping his hand. Maybe I was the problem. Pastor Reynolds pulled out a document. He said Daniel is willing to drop the custody petition if you agree to marriage counseling. He is willing to give you space to heal if you promise not to pursue criminal charges. This is a reconciliation agreement. It gives you both time to work on your marriage. Patricia said, think about your baby, Sarah. Think about what is best for her. I looked at that document, at the signatures already on it. Daniel's signature, his lawyer's signature. All I had to do was add mine, and this would all go away. The custody battle, the legal fees, the fear. All I had to do was go back. I picked up the pen. My hand was shaking. I held the pen above the paper. And then there was a knock on the door. I got up and looked through the peephole. It was Jake. I opened the door. He looked at Pastor Reynolds and Patricia, then at the document in my hand. He said, what is going on? Pastor Reynolds said, we are having a private conversation. This does not concern you. Jake looked at me. He said, Sarah, do you want me to leave? I looked at Jake, at the man who had spent 6 years in captivity, at the man who had escaped and served and come back, at the man who had spent months watching over me from a distance, not because he wanted to control me, but because he wanted to make sure I was safe. I said, no, stay. Jake walked into the room. He looked at the document in my hand. He said, what is that? I said, a reconciliation agreement. If I sign it, Daniel drops the custody petition. Jake said, and if you do not sign it? I said, I go to court and probably lose my baby. Jake took the document from my hand. He read it carefully. Then he said, this agreement says you cannot pursue criminal charges. It says you agree to attend counseling with Daniel. It says you agree not to speak publicly about the incident. Sarah, this is not reconciliation. This is a gag order. Patricia said, it is a compromise. It is what marriage requires. Jake turned to Patricia and Pastor Reynolds. He said, get out. Pastor Reynolds said, young man, you have no authority here. Jake said, and you have no right to pressure a domestic violence victim into signing away her rights. Get out before I call the police. They left, but not before Patricia turned to me and said, you are making a terrible mistake, Sarah. You are going to regret this. After they were gone, Jake sat down beside me. He said, you cannot sign that agreement. I said, what choice do I have? If I do not sign it, I lose my baby. Jake said, if you sign it, you lose yourself. I started crying again. I said, I have nothing, Jake. No money, no job, no family. How am I supposed to fight someone like Daniel? Jake said, you are not alone. I said, yes, I am. He said, no, you have me. And that was the moment I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could survive this. Jake made coffee in the motel's tiny coffee maker. It was terrible coffee, but it was warm, and it gave us something to do with our hands while we talked. He sat across from me in the motel room's only chair and said, I need to tell you everything about what happened, about why I never contacted you, about all of it. I said, okay. Jake took a breath. He said, after the ambush, we were taken to a compound in the mountains. They interrogated us, tortured some of us. 2 of my unit died in the first year. The other guy who survived with me, his name was Marcus. We kept each other alive. We made a plan to escape. It took us 4 years to find the right moment. When we finally got out, we walked for 3 days through the mountains before we found a village that helped us contact the U.S. military. I listened without interrupting. This was his story. He needed to tell it. Jake continued. He said, when I got back to the States, I was a mess. PTSD, nightmares, panic attacks. The VA hospitalized me for months. They were worried I might hurt myself. They put me on medication, put me in therapy. It took me a year before I could function again. And when I finally got clearance to leave the VA hospital, I started looking for you. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. It was me and Daniel at a company party. I was smiling, wearing a blue dress, holding a glass of wine. Daniel's arm was around my waist. Jake said, "I found you on social media. I saw that you had moved on. You had remarried. You looked happy. And I thought maybe the best thing I could do for you was stay dead." I said, "That was not your choice to make." Jake said, "I know, and I was wrong. But I was so messed up in my own head. I thought you deserved better than someone who woke up screaming every night. Someone who could not hold down a job. Someone who was broken." I looked at this man who I had loved so deeply when I was young, who I had grieved for, who I had let go of so I could move forward with my life. I said, "You were not broken. You were surviving." Jake said, "It took me a long time to understand that. And by the time I did, you were already married to Daniel. But I kept checking on you. I looked at your social media. I tracked where you lived. And the more I watched, the more I saw things that worried me." I said, "What things?" Jake said, "You stopped posting photos with friends. Your posts became less frequent. When you did post, it was always pictures Daniel had taken or pictures of things Daniel wanted you to share. You stopped looking like yourself. You looked like someone playing a role." I felt exposed. Everything Jake was saying was true, but hearing it out loud made it more real. Jake said, "Then I heard about the hospital fundraiser. I saw that Daniel's company was a sponsor. I knew you would be there. So I applied for a job with the catering company, and I showed up that night just to make sure you were okay." I said, "And you saw what happened?" Jake nodded. He said, "I saw him grab you. I saw you try to get away. I saw him hit you, and I could not just stand there and do nothing." We sat in silence for a moment. Then I said, "What about the video?" Monica said it might not be admissible. Jake said, "I made copies. I backed it up to 3 different servers. Even if Monica cannot testify, the video exists. And there are other witnesses. 73 people saw what happened." I said, "Daniel's lawyers are already working on discrediting me. They are going to paint me as an unstable pregnant woman who made false allegations." Jake leaned forward. He said, "Sarah, I need to tell you something else. Something important." I looked at him. There was something in his expression that made my stomach tighten. He said, "You and Daniel are not legally married." I blinked. I said, "What?" Jake said, "You and I never divorced. When I was declared dead, you should have received a death certificate. But I was never actually dead. I was missing in action. The military declared me deceased after 7 years. But when I came back, that declaration was reversed, which means our marriage was never legally dissolved." I felt the room spinning. I said, "Are you saying?" Jake said, "Your marriage to Daniel is void. You committed bigamy, technically, though you did not know it, which means Daniel has no legal rights to your baby." For a moment, I could not breathe. Then I started laughing. It was a slightly hysterical laugh, but it was real. I said, "He has no rights to my baby." Jake said, "None. I already contacted a lawyer, a guy I know from the VA who specializes in military family law. His name is Michael O'Brien. He is willing to help you pro bono. He is filing paperwork right now to prove that your marriage to Daniel is invalid." I felt hope blooming in my chest for the first time in days. I said, "What does that mean for the custody hearing?" Jake said, "It means Daniel's petition is worthless. He is not your legal husband, and he is not the baby's legal father. He has no standing to sue for custody." I put my hand on my belly. My baby girl kicked, as if she understood that something important had just happened. I said, "What happens after? What does this mean for us?" "For you and me," Jake said, "it means you are technically still my wife. But Sarah, I am not asking you to stay married to me. I am not asking you to come back to me. I am just giving you information so you can make informed decisions. If you want a divorce, we will get a divorce. If you want to stay married, we will figure that out. But right now, the most important thing is keeping you and your baby safe." I looked at Jake Cooper, at the man who had been my husband, at the man who had come back from the dead, at the man who was offering me freedom instead of control. I said, "One step at a time." He said, "One step at a time." The family court was exactly as grim as I expected. Gray walls, fluorescent lights, hard wooden benches. I sat next to Michael O'Brien, the VA lawyer Jake had found for me. He was a man in his 50s with gray hair and a calm, steady demeanor. Across the aisle sat Daniel with his lawyer, Robert Sterling. Sterling was everything Daniel liked. Expensive suit, perfect hair, confident smile. Daniel looked polished and professional. He had taken time to craft his appearance carefully, the wounded husband trying to protect his unborn child. Judge Margaret Hartwell entered the courtroom. She was a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she had seen every kind of custody battle imaginable. Sterling stood and began his opening statement. He painted a picture of Daniel as a devoted husband who had been provoked by his emotionally unstable pregnant wife. He talked about my lack of employment, my lack of stable housing, my history of cutting off family members. He made me sound like a danger to my own child. Then it was O'Brien's turn. He stood slowly and said, "Your Honor, before we proceed, I need to bring something to the court's attention. This entire custody petition is invalid because Daniel Mitchell has no legal standing to request custody." Sterling jumped to his feet. He said, "Objection. What is he talking about?" O'Brien pulled out a stack of documents. He said, "These are military records proving that Sarah Mitchell's first husband, Jake Cooper, was declared missing in action in 2016 and subsequently found alive in 2022. At no point was there a valid death certificate. At no point was their marriage legally dissolved, which means Sarah's marriage to Daniel Mitchell is void due to bigamy." The courtroom went silent. Daniel's face turned white. Sterling grabbed the documents and read through them quickly. His confident expression crumbled. Judge Hartwell said, "Counselor, are you telling me that Ms. Mitchell is still legally married to another man?" O'Brien said, "Yes, Your Honor. Jake Cooper is alive and present in this courtroom. He is prepared to testify to his identity and his legal status as Sarah Mitchell's husband." Jake stood from where he had been sitting in the back of the courtroom. He walked forward and presented his military identification to the judge. Judge Hartwell studied the ID carefully. Then she looked at Daniel. She said, "Mr. Mitchell, were you aware that your marriage to Ms. Mitchell might not be valid?" Daniel said, "No, Your Honor, I had no idea. We married in good faith." Sterling said, "Your Honor, my client was deceived. He believed he was entering into a legal marriage. The fact that Ms. Mitchell's first husband returned from the dead does not negate my client's emotional bond with the unborn child." O'Brien said, "The law is clear, Your Honor. Without a legal marriage, Mr. Mitchell has no parental rights. He is not the biological father. He is not the adoptive father. He is not the legal husband. He has no standing to petition for custody." Judge Hartwell was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Mr. Sterling, I am inclined to agree with Mr. O'Brien. Unless you can provide legal precedent for a custody claim under these circumstances, I am going to dismiss this petition." Sterling said, "Your Honor, we would like to request a continuance to research the legal issues involved." Judge Hartwell said, "Request denied. This petition is dismissed. Mr. Mitchell, you have no legal claim to this child." Daniel shot to his feet. He said, "This is insane. That is my baby. I raised her for 7 months. I supported Sarah through her entire pregnancy." Judge Hartwell said, "Mr. Mitchell, I understand your feelings, but the law is the law. You may wish to pursue other legal avenues, but this court does not have jurisdiction over your claim. This hearing is adjourned." She banged her gavel. Daniel turned to me. His face was twisted with rage and desperation. He said, "Sarah, you cannot do this. That is my daughter." I stood up slowly. I put my hand on my belly. I said, "No, Daniel. She is mine, and you will never control her the way you controlled me." Security stepped forward as Daniel tried to approach me. They escorted him out of the courtroom while he shouted about lawyers and appeals and justice. I stood there shaking, barely able to believe what had just happened. O'Brien said, "You did it. You are free." But I did not feel free. Not yet. Because as I walked out of that courtroom, I felt a sudden, sharp pain low in my abdomen. A pain that made me gasp and double over. Jake caught me. He said, "Sarah, what is wrong?" I said, "Something is wrong with the baby." And then my water broke. The ambulance ride to the hospital was a blur of sirens and pain and fear. Contractions were coming fast and hard. Too fast. Too hard. The baby was not due for another 6 weeks. Jake sat beside me in the ambulance, holding my hand. He said, "Just breathe. Just focus on breathing. I said, it is too early. The baby's not ready. The paramedic said, ma'am, babies are born premature all the time. The hospital has an excellent neonatal unit. Just try to stay calm. But I could not stay calm. I was terrified. Terrified that the stress of the custody battle had hurt my baby. Terrified that my daughter would be born too early and something would go wrong. Terrified that after everything, I would lose her anyway. At the hospital, they rushed me into the labor and deliver unit. Dr. Williams was there. She examined me quickly and said, you are already 6 centimeters dilated. This baby is coming today. They hooked me up to monitors. They gave me an IV. They checked the baby's heart rate and blood pressure. Everything was happening so fast I could barely process it. Jake stayed beside me the entire time. He held my hand through the contractions. He helped me breathe. He told me I was strong. He told me I was brave. He told me everything was going to be okay. Hours passed. The pain grew worse. The contractions came closer together. And then finally, Dr. Williams said, okay, Sarah, it is time to push. I pushed with everything I had. I pushed through the pain and the fear and the exhaustion. I pushed thinking about my daughter, about giving her life, about bringing her into a world where she would be safe and loved and free. And then I heard it, the most beautiful sound in the world, my baby crying. Dr. Williams lifted her up. She was tiny and red and perfect. She said, congratulations, Sarah. You have a healthy baby girl. They placed her on my chest. She was so small, so fragile, but she was alive. She was here. She was mine. I looked down at my daughter and I said, hello, sweet girl. I am your mama. And I promise you, I will never let anyone hurt you. I will never let anyone control you. You are going to grow up strong and brave and free. Jake was crying. I was crying. Even Dr. Williams had tears in her eyes. The nurse took the baby to clean her and weigh her and check her vitals. She came back a few minutes later and said, 5 pounds, 3 ounces. A little small, but very healthy. She is a fighter. I said, just like her mama. They brought me to a recovery room where I could rest. Jake sat in the chair beside my bed, watching me hold my daughter. We did not talk. We just existed in that moment of peace. Then there was a commotion outside in the hallway, raised voices, security guards, and Daniel. I heard him shouting. He said, that is my daughter. You cannot keep me from seeing my daughter. Jake stood up. He said, stay here, I'll handle this. He walked out into the hallway. I could hear their voices through the door. Daniel said, get out of my way. I have a right to see her. Jake said, no, you do not. The court already ruled on that. Daniel said, I do not care what the court said. That is my baby. Jake's voice went cold. He said, you have no legal rights to that child. You have no moral rights either. You hit Sarah. You controlled her. You tried to take her baby away from her. You need to leave. Now, Daniel said, oh, or what? What are you going to do about it? Security guards intervened. I heard them telling Daniel he needed to leave the hospital or they would call the police. I heard Daniel threatening lawsuits and claiming discrimination and making wild accusations. But eventually his voice faded as they escorted him away. Jake came back into the room. He said, he is gone. Security is going to make sure he does not come back. I looked down at my sleeping daughter. I said, is it really over? Jake said, the legal battle is over. Daniel has no rights to her, but he might still try to cause trouble. You should file for a restraining order. You should document everything. You should protect yourself. I said, I will. Jake hesitated. Then he said, Sarah, I need to ask you something. What do you want to do about us? About our marriage? I looked at him, at the man who had come back from the dead, at the man who had protected me without trying to control me, at the man who had given me information and choices instead of demands. I said, I do not know yet. I need time to figure out who I am without Daniel. I need time to heal. I need time to learn how to be a mother. Jake nodded. He said, take all the time you need. I am not going anywhere, but I am also not going to pressure you. Whatever you decide, I will support it. I said, can you stay? Just for tonight, I do not want to be alone. He said, of course. So Jake slept in the chair beside my hospital bed while I held my daughter and watched her breathe and thanked whoever might be listening that we had both survived. The apartment was small. One bedroom, one bathroom, a kitchen barely big enough for two people to stand in. But it was mine. I paid the rent with money from my freelance marketing work. I bought the furniture at thrift stores. I hung curtains that I chose myself. It was nothing like the house on Riverside Drive, but it was home. My daughter Emily was 6 months old. She was healthy and happy and growing bigger every day. She had my eyes and my nose and a smile that could light up a room. I was working from home, taking on small marketing projects for local businesses. It was not glamorous work, but it paid the bills. And more importantly, it gave me independence. I had my own bank account, my own credit card, my own money that no one controlled but me. Jake visited regularly. We had settled into a strange kind of friendship. We were technically still married, but we were not together. We had agreed to take things slowly, to figure out who we were as individuals before we tried to figure out who we might be as a couple. He was good with Emily. He would sit on the floor and play with her. He would help me with midnight feedings when he stayed over. He never pressured me for more than I was willing to give. Rebecca Thompson had found me through social media after the story about the custody battle made local news. She showed up at my apartment with groceries and baby clothes and apologies for not trying harder to stay in touch. We had spent hours catching up, crying, and rebuilding our friendship. As for Daniel, I had not seen him since the hospital. I had a restraining order that required him to stay at least 500 feet away from me. He had tried to appeal the court's ruling about the invalid marriage, but every lawyer he consulted told him the same thing. He had no legal claim to Emily. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he had lost his CEO position. The video of him hitting me had gone viral online. His company's board forced him to resign. He was still wealthy, but his reputation was destroyed. I felt no satisfaction from his downfall. I felt nothing for him at all. He was just a part of my past now, a lesson I had learned about control and manipulation and the difference between love and possession. One evening, Rebecca came over for dinner. She brought wine for herself and sparkling cider for me since I was still breastfeeding. We sat on my secondhand couch while Emily played on a blanket on the floor. Rebecca said, "Can I ask you something?" I said, "Sure." She said, "Are you happy?" I thought about that question, about what happiness meant. 6 months ago, I would have said happiness was security, a nice house, a successful husband, the appearance of a perfect life. Now I knew better. I said, I am working 2 jobs to pay rent on a tiny apartment. I am sleep deprived. I have stretch marks and bags under my eyes. I am in therapy twice a week for PTSD. I do not know if I am going to stay married to Jake or get a divorce. My life is messy and complicated and uncertain. Rebecca said, "So not happy?" I looked down at Emily. She was grabbing her toes and making happy little sounds. I said, "But I am free, and that is worth more than happiness. That is worth everything." Rebecca raised her glass. She said, "To freedom." I raised my sparkling cider. I said, "To freedom." Then someone pounded on my apartment door, hard, aggressive, the kind of knocking that made my blood run cold. Emily started crying. Rebecca's eyes went wide. We both knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. Daniel. He was standing in the hallway, swaying slightly. His suit was wrinkled. His tie was loose. His eyes were bloodshot. He had been drinking. He pounded again. He shouted, "Sarah, I know you are in there. Open this door. We need to talk." My hands were shaking. I pulled out my phone and called 911. Then I called Jake. Daniel kept pounding. He said, "You ruined my life. Do you understand that? You took everything from me, my job, my reputation, my daughter, everything." Rebecca moved to stand between me and the door. She whispered, "Do not open it. The police are coming." But Daniel was not done. He said, "I gave you everything. I loved you. I protected you. And this is how you repay me? By destroying me?" I heard footsteps running up the stairs. Jake appeared at the end of the hallway. He was out of breath, like he had sprinted the entire way. When he saw Daniel, his entire body went rigid. Jake said, "Get away from that door." Daniel turned. He laughed. It was a bitter, drunk laugh. He said, "Oh, look, the dead husband. Come to play hero again?" Jake walked toward Daniel slowly. His hands were loose at his sides, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He said, "You are violating a restraining order. The police are on their way. Leave now and maybe they will go easy on you. Daniel said, go easy on me. I lost everything because of that video. Because of you. You had no right to interfere. Jake said, I had every right. You hit a pregnant woman. You think you get to walk away from that? Daniel took a step toward Jake. He said, she is my wife. That is my baby. You are the one who does not belong here. Jake's voice went cold and dangerous. He said, she was never your wife. Your marriage was void. You have no legal rights. You have no moral rights. And if you do not leave right now, I am going to make you leave. Daniel swung at Jake. It was a clumsy, drunk punch that Jake dodged easily. Then Jake grabbed Daniel's arm, twisted it behind his back, and slammed him against the hallway wall. Daniel cried out in pain. Jake said, you are done. Do you hear me? You are done hurting her. Police sirens echoed from outside. Footsteps pounded up the stairs. 2 officers appeared, guns drawn. One officer said, everybody freeze. Jake slowly released Daniel and stepped back with his hands up. He said, officers, this man violated a restraining order. He was threatening my wife and our child. I was defending them. The officers moved in quickly. They handcuffed Daniel. He was shouting about false accusations and lies and conspiracy, but no one was listening anymore. One of the officers said, ma'am, are you Sarah Mitchell? I nodded. The officer said, we have the restraining order on file. He is going to be arrested for violation. You will need to give a statement. As they led Daniel away, he looked back at me one last time. His face was twisted with rage and self-pity. He said, you are going to regret this. This is not over. But I looked right back at him and said, yes, it is. It is over, Daniel. You will never control me again. And I meant it. People ask me if I got my happy ending. The answer is yes, but not the way anyone expected. It is Emily's first birthday party. My small apartment is crowded with people. Rebecca and her husband, Jake's friend Marcus from the military, Dr. Williams from the hospital, my therapy group friends, Monica Barrett, who quit her job at Daniel's company and became a domestic violence advocate. Even Officer Morrison stopped by with a stuffed teddy bear for Emily. My apartment is decorated with pink balloons and a homemade banner that says, Happy Birthday, Emily. There is a small cake shaped like a butterfly. Emily is wearing a little dress covered in frosting, laughing as everyone sings to her. This is what freedom looks like. Not a fairy tale, not perfection, just real people who showed up when it mattered. 6 months ago, Daniel was sentenced to 18 months in prison for violating the restraining order and for assault. The district attorney finally pressed charges after public pressure from the viral video. He served his time. He is out now, living in another state, but he knows better than to contact me. His lawyers made it very clear that any attempt would result in immediate arrest. His company released a statement condemning his actions and announcing a new workplace violence prevention program. They donated $50,000 to a domestic violence shelter in my name. I did not ask for it, but I accepted it. And I used some of that money to start a small consulting business helping other survivors rebuild their financial independence. As for Jake and me, we spent a year in couples therapy. It was hard. It was messy. We had to grieve for the people we used to be. We had to learn who we had become. We had to decide if those 2 people could build something new together. 3 months ago, we decided to try. Really try. Jake moved into an apartment 2 blocks away, close enough to be present, far enough to give me space. We are dating. It sounds strange to say I am dating my own husband, but that is what we are doing, learning each other again, slowly, carefully, with no pressure and no expectations. Last week, I did something that terrified me. A local news station reached out and asked if I would do an interview about domestic violence awareness. I said yes. I sat in front of a camera and I told my story. Not all of it, just enough. I talked about the small signs of control, the isolation, the financial abuse, the way it creeps up so slowly you do not realize you are trapped until it is almost too late. The interview aired 3 days ago. My phone has not stopped ringing. Women reaching out to say thank you, to say me too, to say they saw themselves in my story, to ask for help. I am not a hero. I am not special. I am just someone who survived. But if telling my story helps even one woman recognize the signs and get out sooner, then it was worth it. Rebecca walks over and hands me a glass of sparkling cider. She says, "Look at you, starting a business, doing interviews, rebuilding your life. I am so proud of you." I look around my small, crowded apartment, at Emily smashing cake into her hair, at Jake laughing with Marcus about something, at all these people who showed up for me when I had nothing. I say, "I could not have done it without all of you." Rebecca says, "Yes, you could have, but you did not have to. That is the difference." Emily reaches for me with her frosting-covered hands. I pick her up and hold her close. She smells like vanilla cake and baby shampoo and hope. I think about the woman I was a year ago, standing in that gymnasium in a too-tight burgundy dress, afraid to take up space, afraid to speak up, afraid to exist too loudly. That woman is gone. In her place is someone who knows her own worth, someone who makes her own choices, someone who understands that love does not mean control, that marriage does not mean giving up yourself, that asking for help is not weakness but strength. Is this a happy ending? Yes, but not because everything is perfect. Because I am free. Freedom looks like paying your own bills in a tiny apartment. Freedom looks like choosing who gets access to your life. Freedom looks like saying no without explaining yourself. Freedom looks like making mistakes and learning from them without someone telling you that you are worthless. Freedom looks like holding your daughter and knowing she will grow up watching a mother who stands on her own 2 feet, who fights for herself, who refuses to accept less than she deserves. If you are reading this story or listening to it and you see yourself in it, I want you to know something. You are not crazy. You are not dramatic. You are not overreacting. If someone is controlling your money, your phone, your friends, your choices, that is not love. That is abuse. You deserve better. You deserve to be safe. You deserve freedom. Leaving is terrifying, but staying is worse. Staying means losing yourself piece by piece until there is nothing left. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233. They will help you make a safety plan. They will connect you with resources. They will remind you that you are not alone. And here is what I learned. The hardest part is not leaving. The hardest part is believing you deserve better. So start there. Start by believing you are worth saving. Everything else follows. Emily is getting sleepy. Her head rests on my shoulder. Jake walks over and gently touches her back. He says, "Should I help you put her down?" I look at him, at this man who came back from the dead, who protected me without trying to own me, who gave me space to heal, who is learning alongside me what healthy love looks like. I say, "Yes, thank you." We walk together to Emily's room. We put her in her crib together. We stand there watching her breathe. And in that moment, I realize something important. This is not the ending I imagined, but it is the ending I needed. Not perfect, not a fairy tale, just real, just free, just enough. Tomorrow, I have a business meeting with a potential client. Tomorrow, Jake and I have a therapy session. Tomorrow, I have a dozen choices to make, and I will make them myself. That is my happy ending. Not perfection, just the knowledge that I survived. I fought. I won. And sometimes that is everything.